Senior Iranian military commander made a statement that barely made headlines in the West. He said, and these are his words, that no Israeli military installation is beyond the reach of Iran's missile forces. Most people dismissed it. Most analysts moved on. Most news cycles buried it within 48 hours. Nobody took it seriously enough to obvious follow-up question. What happens if they actually try? Well, now we know, because within the last several hours, reports began surfacing that Iranian forces launched a missile strike targeting one of the most strategically critical military installations in the entire Middle East. Not a small outpost, not a symbolic target chosen for its optics. They targeted Nevatim Air Base deep inside Israeli territory, one of the most protected, most important, most carefully guarded military facilities that Israel operates. And the moment those reports started coming in, something interesting happened. The story split in two directions simultaneously. Iran said one thing, Israel said something completely different. And right now, the rest of the world is sitting in the middle of those two narratives, trying to figure out which version is closer to the truth. That gap between the two narratives is exactly what we are going to examine today. Carefully, methodically, without hysteria and without spin. Because what happened here, or what may have happened here, carries implications that extend far beyond a single military strike. This is about deterrence. This is about capability. This is about the question every government in the region is quietly asking right now. Has the confrontation between Iran and Israel crossed into a new phase? And if it has, what comes next? Let us start with what Iranian state media reported. Because the Iranian account was detailed, confident, and immediate, Iranian officials did not hedge. They did not speak in vague terms. They came out quickly and they made specific claims. According to Iranian state media, multiple long-range missiles were launched towards southern Israel during the operation. The target, Iranian officials stated clearly, was Nevatim Air Base. And according to Iran, those missiles reached their target. Iranian military spokesman described the operation as precise. They used the word successful. They claimed the missiles struck critical sections of the facility and caused serious damage to key infrastructure at the base. Think about that framing for a moment. Iran was not merely saying we launched missiles in the direction of Israel. They were saying we hit one of Israel's most important military installations and we damaged it significantly. That is a very specific and very bold claim, and it was broadcast immediately across Iranian state media channels. Military commanders gave statements. Officials emphasized that the operation was intended to send a message. The message being that Israel's most protected military assets are no longer safe. That even the facilities buried deep in the Negev desert, surrounded by layers of air defense systems and early warning technology, can be reached and struck. For Iran, that message carries enormous strategic weight. Deterrence in military terms is not simply about having weapons. It is about convincing your adversary that you are willing and capable of using those weapons against targets that matter. By claiming a successful strike on Nevatim, Iran was essentially announcing to Israel, to the United States, to every regional government watching, and to its own domestic audience, that the balance of power has shifted, that the confrontation has entered a new chapter, that the days of Iran being able to threaten but never actually reach high-value Israeli targets may be over. That is a significant strategic statement, even if you are deeply skeptical of it. Now let us look at what Israel said, because the Israeli account was equally immediate, equally confident, and pointed in the exact opposite direction. Israeli defense officials stated that the country's air defense network detected the incoming missiles long before they posed any threat to the base. According to Israeli authorities, the multi-layered missile defense architecture that Israel has spent years developing and refining performed exactly as designed. Early warning radar systems identified the launches almost immediately. The trajectory of each incoming missile was tracked in real time. Interception decisions were made rapidly. Defensive batteries were activated. And according to Israeli officials, the interceptors engaged the incoming missiles and neutralized them before they could reach Nevatim Air Base. Israeli sources were direct about this. They said the core infrastructure of the base remained intact. They said the facility remained fully operational. They acknowledged that some debris from intercepted missiles may have fallen in surrounding areas, which is a normal consequence of aerial interception. But on the central question of whether Nevatim suffered serious damage, Israeli officials were unambiguous. The answer, according to Israel, was no. American media outlets, citing defense officials with access to intelligence on the event, reported the same basic conclusion. The strikes were detected. The defensive systems responded. The base was protected. The interceptors worked. So now you have two completely opposing stories being told simultaneously by two parties who both have strong reasons to tell the story in a way that serves their strategic interests. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because both narratives are not equally mysterious. When you think about the incentives on each side, the picture becomes sharper. Iran needs this strike to be a success. Domestically, the Iranian government has spent years building a political narrative around its military capability and its resistance to what Iranian leaders describe as Israeli aggression. If Iran launched a major missile operation and the missiles were all intercepted and the base suffered no damage whatsoever, that is not a story the Iranian government can easily tell its own people. So when Iranian state media broadcasts claims of a precise and successful strike against a critical Israeli facility, you have to ask the basic question that applies to any government-controlled media outlet anywhere in the world. How much of this account is shaped by what actually happened, and how much of it is shaped by what the Iranian government needs its audience to believe happened? That is not a cynical question. It is the only responsible question to ask. On the other side, Israel has its own incentive structure. For the Israeli government, demonstrating that its air defense systems work is critically important. Public confidence in Israel's ability to protect itself is not just a military matter. It is a political matter. It is a psychological matter. It affects how Israeli citizens feel about their safety, how international allies assess Israel's defensive capabilities, and how adversaries calculate the risks of future attacks. So, when Israeli officials quickly and confidently announce that their interceptors neutralize the incoming missiles, you should also apply the same basic analytical pressure. Is this account accurate? Or is it shaped in part by what the Israeli government needs the public to believe? Both of these questions deserve to be asked honestly. Neither side gets a free pass. What sits between these two competing narratives is a complex operational reality that military analysts are still working to piece together, and that process takes time. In the modern information environment, the immediate aftermath of a military event is often the period of greatest confusion and greatest misinformation. Governments speak quickly because silence creates its own narrative. Media outlets report what officials tell them because that is what they have, and the public receives two contradictory versions of the same event, and is left trying to decide which one to believe before anyone has actually verified anything properly. Satellite imagery is one of the most reliable tools analysts use in situations like this. High-resolution images of military installations taken before and after a reported strike can reveal whether runways have been damaged, whether aircraft hangars show signs of impact, whether vehicles or equipment have been destroyed, and whether the overall layout of the facility has changed in ways consistent with a successful attack. If Nevatim Air Base absorbed serious missile strikes, that damage should eventually be visible in imagery captured after the event. But that analysis takes time, and in the immediate hours following the reported strike, definitive photographic or satellite evidence had not yet been publicly confirmed or widely published. What was clear, even in the absence of that confirmation, was that the event itself had dramatically changed the atmosphere across the region. Because here is something that is easy to miss when you are focused entirely on the question of whether the missiles hit or whether they were intercepted. The act of launching long-range missiles at a strategic Israeli air base is itself significant regardless of the outcome. Let that sit for a moment. Even if every single missile Iran fired was intercepted perfectly, even if not a single piece of infrastructure at Nevatim was touched, the fact that Iran targeted that specific base with that level of stated intent represents a serious escalation. It represents a declaration of willingness to strike one of Israel's most critical military installations, and declarations of willingness in the language of military strategy are not trivial. They shape how adversaries plan, they shape how allies respond, they shape how regional governments recalibrate their own security calculations. Regional governments across the Middle East began monitoring the situation with acute attention the moment those reports emerged, because the implications of a direct missile exchange between Iran and Israel extend far beyond the two countries involved. The Middle East is a region where instability in one corner tends to travel quickly. Energy infrastructure, shipping lanes, diplomatic relationships, military alliances, and civilian populations across multiple countries are all affected when the two most powerful and most adversarial military forces in the region begin exchanging direct strikes. Financial markets began reacting cautiously as well. Although the target in this case was a military installation rather than energy infrastructure, markets read Middle East instability with a consistent logic. Uncertainty drives risk calculations, and when risk calculations shift, investment behavior shifts. Energy traders began watching closely. Investors in regional markets adjusted their positions. Policymakers in governments far from the conflict zone started receiving briefings about potential economic ripple effects if the situation escalated further. Behind the public statements and the competing media narratives, diplomatic activity was happening quietly. International governments that maintain relationships with both sides, or that have strong interest in regional stability, began working their channels. Calls were made. Messages were delivered. The language of those conversations is always careful and always formal, but the underlying message in moments like this is almost always the same: exercise restraint. Do not allow this to spiral. The consequences of further escalation are worse for everyone than the consequences of stopping here. Whether those diplomatic efforts were heard, whether they influenced decision-making on either side, remained unclear in the immediate hours following the reported strike. But let us return to the specific question of Nevatim Air Base, because understanding why this particular facility was chosen as a target, if the Iranian account is accurate, tells you a great deal about what Iran was trying to achieve strategically. Nevatim is not a random location. It is not a secondary facility chosen because it was easier to target. Nevatim Air Base is located in the Negev desert in southern Israel, and it is widely considered one of the most important installations in the entire Israeli Air Force. The base supports multiple operational squadrons. It is equipped with facilities capable of handling some of the most advanced aircraft in Israel's inventory. It plays a central and critical role in long-range mission planning, in intelligence coordination, and in the overall structure of Israel's strategic air power. When Iranian officials described their target selection, they made the strategic logic explicit. By aiming at Nevatim, they were sending a message not just about capability, but about intent. The message was that Iran is willing to target the foundations of Israeli air power, not peripheral targets, not symbolic locations, the actual operational core of Israel's ability to project military force at long range. Israeli officials pushed back hard against that framing, and they did so not just by questioning whether the missiles succeeded, but by emphasizing something deeper. They emphasized that Israel's defensive architecture was built precisely for moments like this. The multi-layered system that Israel operates is designed to handle threats at every stage of flight. Long-range interceptors are positioned to engage ballistic missiles during their descent. Additional layers provide coverage against shorter-range threats. The entire system is integrated, coordinated, and continuously upgraded based on lessons from previous confrontations. Israeli officials argued that the defensive performance during this incident validated years of investment in that technology, that even when a determined adversary launches a coordinated strike at a critical target, the defensive systems can protect what matters. That argument carries weight with Israel's domestic audience. It carries weight with Israel's international allies, particularly in Washington, where American military planners have invested significantly in supporting Israeli air defense capabilities. But Iranian officials dismissed that framing entirely. In their account, the missiles reached the base. The defenses, whatever form they took, were not sufficient to prevent the strike from succeeding. The infrastructure was damaged. The message was delivered. And in the Iranian narrative, no amount of Israeli government statements changes that underlying reality. This is the fundamental dynamic that defines so much of modern conflict communication. Two governments, two sets of strategic interests, two completely different accounts of the same event, and a global audience trying to determine which version reflects what actually happened on the ground at Nevatim Air Base. Military analysts understand this dynamic well. They approach these situations with a methodical patience that is often difficult to maintain in the immediate information environment surrounding a major military event. They look at the available evidence carefully. They account for the incentive structures on both sides. They wait for satellite imagery, for signals intelligence assessments, for corroborating or contradicting reports from neutral parties. And over time, a clearer picture tends to emerge. That picture was still forming at the time these events unfolded. What was not forming, what was already fully visible and fully real, was the broader strategic environment that this incident had intensified. The confrontation between Iran and Israel had been building through a series of escalating exchanges over months, each one pushing the boundaries a little further, each one raising the question of how far both sides were willing to go before the situation crossed a threshold that could no longer be managed or contained. The reported strike on Nevatim represented one of the most direct and significant moments in that escalating confrontation. Whether it succeeded in damaging the base or whether Israeli defenses intercepted every missile cleanly, the event itself marked something important. It marked the degree to which Iran was willing to push. It marked the willingness to target not just symbolic or peripheral Israeli assets, but the operational heart of Israeli air power. And it raised the question that every serious analyst, every regional government, and every diplomatic channel was already asking quietly before the missiles were even fired. How does Israel respond? What does a proportional response look like when the target that was attacked, or allegedly attacked, is one of your most critical military installations? And what does the cycle of action and response look like over the weeks and months that follow this moment? Those questions had no clean answers in the immediate aftermath. They rarely do. History is full of moments that look contained in the hours after they occurred and then revealed themselves over time to be turning points. Moments where the decisions made in the days and weeks that followed determined whether a confrontation de-escalated into an uneasy standoff or accelerated into something larger and more destructive. The situation surrounding Nevatim Air Base was one of those moments. Uncertain in its immediate details, significant in its strategic implications, and deeply consequential for the trajectory of one of the most volatile and most carefully watched conflicts in the world today. Iran claimed it struck the base. Israel said its defenses held. The world watched and waited for evidence that would clarify which account was closer to the truth. But here is what both accounts agreed on, even if neither side acknowledged it directly. Something happened over the skies of southern Israel. Missiles were launched, defensive systems were activated. A confrontation that has been building for years reached a new level of intensity. And Nevatim Air Base, whether damaged or defended, whether struck or protected, became the focal point of a moment that the entire world was watching. The calm surface of the region's daily geopolitics had cracked once again. And underneath it, as always, the pressures had not gone away. They had simply become more visible, more urgent, and more difficult to contain. We will continue tracking this story as new information emerges, as satellite imagery becomes available, as analysts publish their assessments, as governments release whatever portions of their intelligence evaluations they are willing to make public. Because the story of what really happened at Nevatim Air Base is not finished. It is just beginning. And the next chapter will tell us something important, not just about this specific incident, but about where this confrontation is ultimately heading. Stay with us.